Thank you very much for that generous introduction. And thank you very much to Maryanne and to all the organizers of the conference. This is a wonderful opportunity. I'm very pleased to be here and look forward to hearing the papers of all the other presenters. What I'm going to do is offer, I guess you could say, a bit of a preface to the other presentations by looking at what I call the prehistory of the personification of the continents. I'll look at other ways in which personifications have appeared in relationship with early cartography. And I'll begin at the beginning with the sons of Noah and the continents. There's a passage in Genesis 9:18-19 that says, "The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth." And Genesis 10 goes on to list many of the peoples that were descended from the three sons of Noah. But it is not at all clear, and it is not explicitly stated, that the three sons of Noah were associated with what we call the three continents, the three different parts of the world, Asia, Europe, and Africa. That was an interpretation that only became explicit in the 8th century, and I believe the first to state that clearly was the Venerable Bede. But once that association was made explicit, it became very widely diffused. And just to illustrate it rather dramatically, in the spectacular Edward IV roll at the Free Library of Philadelphia, which was made in about 1461, we see Edward IV at the top. So this is a genealogical roll. And it goes all the way back to the beginning. Here are Adam and Eve in Eden. If we move on to the second section of the roll, here we have Father Noah, Noah's Ark, prominently illustrated, and then Sem, the king of Asia, Cham, the king of Africa, and Japhet, the king of Ethiopia, of Africa. So it's not just that their descendants populated these three continents, it's that they're called the kings. The association became that exaggerated. And very handily, there's a TO map in the margin to show which regions they were associated with. So it's an interesting question as to whether we should consider the sons of Noah personifications of the continents. They are not Africa personified, but they are persons who came to represent the continents. So I think that distinction is worth keeping in mind. So here we have a 9th century Mappa Mundi in Isidore's Etymologiae in St. Gall. And there's a phrase to the lower right that says, "Behold, thus the sons of Noah divided the world after the flood." And we have Sem associated with Asia, Cham with Africa, and Japhet with Europe. And one thing that's very interesting, and this is very common to see in the Mappa Mundi in manuscripts of Isidore's Etymologiae, to see the sons of Noah associated with the continents, is that Isidore himself does not make that association. Isidore does not say that the three continents were divided thus to the sons of Noah. So what we're seeing is an element in Isidorean cartography, if we want to call it that, that's independent of the text of Isidore. We have an unfinished Mappa Mundi in manuscript of Isidore's De Natura Rerum in the 12th century, and here we get into the actual representation of the sons of Noah on a medieval map. So we can see the very faint T structure of the TO map, and if we zoom in, we have Christ with a nimbus in the east at the top of the map. And then what we can, I think, only assume or conclude are Noah's sons, each with his hands raised in prayer and associated. So the sun at the center is associated with Asia, which is in the upper part of the map. At the lower left, Europe. At the lower right, Africa. So So here we have artistic representations of the sons of Noah on a medieval map. This image is, I'm sure, familiar, the Mappamundi in Jean Mansel's Fleur des Histoires, 15th century manuscript in Brussels. It's a very frequently reproduced Mappamundi. And here I think the sons of Noah, again, they're not precisely personifications of the continent, but they do verge towards that. They are persons who are representing the continent. And the world map in Schädel's Liber Chronicarum, 1493. One aspect of this map that puzzles me, and here we have the sons of Noah, is that we have Cham in the lower right, quite distant from Africa, and we might have expected that Schädel's artist would choose to put Cham in the lower left, closer to Africa, and move the text to the lower right, but he did not do so. I want to look now at other personifications on early maps to try and convey the idea that the personifications of the continents did not arise ex nihilo. I don't think there's a case, I don't think that any of the examples I'll be showing, I don't think it can be claimed that they directly influenced the rise of the personifications of continents, but I think they're cases worth keeping in mind. So here we have a Mappamundi in a manuscript of Beatus of Liébana's commentary on the Apocalypse. It's a 13th century manuscript in Arroyo. It's now in the BNF. Made in Arroyo, now in the BNF. So just to orient ourselves a little bit, we have paradise in the east at the top of the map, Adam and Eve represented there. At the bottom of the map, which is to say in the west, we have this figure. We see a man wrestling two serpents, and that is in fact a personification of the ocean. So an early personification on a map. And one thing that's particularly interesting to me about this personification is that nothing similar appears on any of the other surviving Beatus maps, that is, any of the other maps in manuscripts of Beatus's commentary on the Apocalypse, which shows that the artists making the maps and the manuscripts had considerable freedom to add elements that they found appealing. So here we have the man wrestling with these two serpents, and I want to show another personification of the ocean that confirms that identification in the 9th century Evangelia. Here at the bottom we have a personification of the ocean. So again, wrestling with two serpents and pouring forth water, confirming his aquatic nature. Another interesting early personification that's associated with a map. Here we have a wind diagram in Isidorus De Rerum Natura, 12th century. So we have the 12 winds around the edge. They are blowing in towards the Earth, which in this case is represented by a small TO map, which we see here. In this case, though, instead of the Earth is represented differently. It's not represented as a TO map, but rather by a personification of the world. So if we zoom in, we have the Earth as the central figure towards which the winds are blowing from the circumference, identified as both mundus and cosmos. This is an unusual map that's very infrequently reproduced. It's a Mappamundi in a 14th century Serbian Psalter in Munich. So to orient ourselves, we have the circumfluent ocean. In the east, we have paradise, and it's a very distinctive representation of paradise with the blessed in the hand of God. It's really quite extraordinary. At the western end of the map, we have a bull's head and an imperial eagle in the water, and this is a very puzzling element of the map. If anyone has any suggestions as to what those two elements are doing there, I'd be delighted to hear them. But then in the middle, we have a personification of the Earth on a peninsula in, well, it's hard to say. We have the east at the top. We have what seems to be the Red Sea at the right. So it's hard to see, hard to imagine what else that body of water could be intended to represent aside from the Mediterranean. But anyway, another case with a personification on an early map, which we see more clearly here. The Tabula Peutingeriana, made in about 1200, is thought to be based on a Roman model. But there's been considerable discussion as to how closely it's based on a Roman model. So here we have Italy, and these are the three personifications. So we have a personification of Rome here, personification of Constantinople here, and a personification of Antioch here. I want to turn now to a very interesting case in which Europe, Asia, and Africa are personified in a cartographic context. And these personifications are discussed by Germain Aujak in the article I indicate here. And it's a very small format manuscript of Ptolemy's geography made in about 1490. We see the world map here. It was made for Andrea Matteo Acquaviva, the 8th Duke of Atri, who lived from 1456 to 1528. He was a notable patron of the letters. But one of the frustrating things about this manuscript, as interesting as it is that we don't have clear information about its genesis in terms of who it was who devised the program of illustration of the continents. We have his arms at the lower right and left of the world map. So following the world map, we have this opening, and then following this opening, we have the 10 Ptolemaic maps of Europe. And appropriately enough, we have a personification of Europe here. So the classical myth of Europa being carried away by a bull who was in fact Zeus. And here we have zooming in on to see Europa on the bull. So the next opening is the first map of Europe. If we proceed through the manuscript, we then get to the 10th map of Europe, the last map of Europe. And then we have these personifications of Asia and the Indus River on the next opening. Another unusual aspect of this manuscript is that the order of the maps is not canonical. Normally, we have the world map, maps of Europe, maps of Africa, and maps of Asia. Here we have the world map, maps of Europe, maps of Asia, and then maps of Africa. So we have here the personification of Asia riding a crocodile, which is an image that appears in a number of later works. And zooming out again, we have at the bottom the arms of Andrea Matteo Acquaviva and his wife. Proceeding through the manuscript, here we have the first map of Asia on the following opening, as we would expect following a personification of Asia. We get to the 12th and final map of Asia here. And then we have Africa personified and Atlas supporting the heavens on the following opening. If we zoom in, we have some typical African animals, ostriches and a lion. We also have Perseus with the severed head of the Medusa flying above. And we have Asia on her elephant holding a palm tree and also a collection of serpents in her hand. And then we have the first map of Africa in the following opening. So a rich program of personification of the continents made in about 1490. So it's a very interesting case. It would also be very interesting to know whether this manuscript had any influence on subsequent representations of the continent. I'm afraid I was not able to find any evidence of such influence. And finally, I want to look at two extraordinary images that involve the reappearance of the sons of Noah in early 17th century world maps, both by Jodocus Hondius. So here we have Hondius's wall map of 1603, which survives in one copy in the McLean collection, which is just outside of Chicago. It's one of the largest private collections of maps in the US. Again, it's the only surviving copy of this map. It was belonged to a noble family in Italy for many years. and was at one point thrown out and then recovered from the garbage and sold at auction. The reason it was sold out is that it's in a damaged state. You can see the text at the bottom, large parts of it are missing. The area I want to look at is North America. So we can see that really the entire interior part of the continent is occupied by these very large and elaborate decorations and information. So we have a genealogical tree at the far left showing the descendants of Noah. Then we have an image of Noah, an image of Japhet, an image of Sem, and an image of Cham. In the middle, we have this very large inset map. And if we zoom in on that, what we have is a topographic map of the propagation of the sons of Noah who are mentioned in Genesis chapter 10. So the dispersal of the sons of Noah and their descendants throughout the world. And one interesting aspect of this map is that it includes the dispersal of human beings to the New World, to the Americas. And so we have Asia there, and just to the right we have part of the New World. And Hannius says it is plausible that the New World was populated by people crossing from Asia to this part. So the arrival of human beings as descendants of Noah to the New World represented, it should be emphasized, in the middle of the New World. And on the next map I'll show, which is the final one of this presentation, it's another map by Hannius made 5 years later. I think what he does is he develops that idea. So just to orient ourselves, the contrast on this map is not great. Here's Africa, South America, North America. If we zoom in, I'll highlight the outlines of the continent. Again, the whole interior of the continent is occupied by this very elaborate decorative program. We again have the descendants of Noah. We have Noah, Japhet, Sem, and Cham. And then in the middle, we have something very different than a world map showing the dispersion of the descendants of the sons of Noah. We have instead personifications of the continents. Here we have Africa. Each of the personifications holds a banner with information about that continent. And in addition, there's further information about each continent in a cartouche above or below. Here we have America. Again, she's holding a banner. And then we have additional information in a cartouche. Here's Europe in the center, again holding a banner with additional information below. And Asia, holding a banner with additional information in this cartouche below. You notice there are not 4, but actually 5 figures, which when I first noticed that brought to mind the Ortelius title page that Maryanne had mentioned, which has the 4 continents and then a representation of the unknown. I don't think that's what's going on here. I wasn't able to find anything that convinced me that this 5th figure represents the unknown. I suspect that this handmaiden, if you will, of Asia was added to create a symmetrical composition. But what's really extraordinary about this scene is that we seem to have a passing of the baton from one iconographic tradition to another. We have the sons of Noah, who have represented the continents in earlier cartography, and then in the middle, the new, more recent personifications, properly speaking, of the continents. And I'll close with that passing of the baton from this earlier tradition to the later, and hope that that serves as an introduction to the talks that follow. Thank you very much.